Pull up your chair closer to the hearth, where the embers glow like the distant watchfires of a desert camp. The wind outside is whispering through the eaves, but in here, among the scrolls and the scent of aged parchment, time moves differently. Let me tell you a story. It is a true story, etched into the dry earth of Mesopotamia and the memory of the Tigris River. It is the story of a man named Abu Ishaq Muhammad, known to history as Al-Mu'tasim, the eighth of his line to hold the mantle of the Abbasid house. Imagine the scene. It is the year 833 of the Common Era. The city of Baghdad is asleep, its thousands of lanterns flickering out one by one, leaving the great round city in a shroud of velvet blue. But in the private quarters of the palace, Al-Mu'tasim is already awake. He was a man of immense physical presence, a son of the legendary Harun al-Rashid, yet he carried himself with a quiet, deliberate heaviness, like a mountain that had decided to walk. His mother, Marida, had come from the lands of the north, and from her he had inherited a constitution of iron. They say he could break a horseshoe with his bare hands, yet on this morning his hands are gentle as he reaches for a bowl of cool water to wash the sleep from his eyes. Listen to the silence of that room. There is only the soft splash of water and the distant, rhythmic call of a night bird. Al-Mu'tasim does not hurry. He understands that a leader's first duty is to master the stillness within himself before he attempts to master the world outside. He stands by the window, looking out over the Tigris. The water is a dark ribbon, reflecting the fading stars. He watches the river, thinking of how it flows, always moving, yet always the same. It is a reflection of power itself, a constant movement that must be channeled, or it will overflow and destroy the very banks that give it shape. As the first grey light of dawn begins to touch the horizon, the calligraphy of dawn, as the poets of his court might call it, Al-Mu'tasim reflects on his brothers who came before him. Al-Amin, the dreamer, Al-Mamun, the scholar who filled the house of wisdom with the books of the Greeks and the Indians. Al-Mu'tasim was different. He was a man of the earth, a man of the sword, and a man of order. He knew that while books could preserve the past, it was the strength of the arm and the clarity of the mind that secured the future. He moves to his low table, where a simple meal of dates, fresh bread, and a small cup of goat's milk awaits him. He eats slowly, savoring the texture of the fruit. He is a man who appreciates the physical reality of things. While others debated the fine points of philosophy, Al-Mu'tasim found wisdom in the weight of a stone, the gait of a horse, and the loyalty of a soldier. He thinks of the city of Baghdad around him. It is crowded. The streets are narrow, choked with the noise of commerce and the friction of too many people living in too small a space. He feels the tension in the air, the way the soldiers of his guard, the men he brought from the Turkic steppes, clash with the locals of the city. He hears the unspoken complaints in the wind. In this quiet hour, a vision begins to take shape in his mind. It is not a vision of war, but of creation. He imagines a new city. Not a city of cramped alleys, but a city of wide avenues, of gardens that breathe, and of palaces that stand as monuments to the order he craves. He can almost smell the dust of the new construction, the scent of wet clay and sun-baked brick. He envisions a place called Samara, asterisk Sarman, Ra, asterisk. He who sees it is delighted. But for now, that city exists only in the silence of his thoughts. He rises from his meal and prepares for the day's business. He dresses in layers of fine silk and wool, the fabric cool against his skin. He fastens his belt, feeling the familiar weight of it. He is a man who values the practical. He does not wear jewels for the sake of vanity. He wears the regalia of his office as a reminder of the burden he carries. He walks through the corridors of the palace. The floors are polished marble, cool beneath his feet. The servants move like shadows, bowing deeply, their movements hushed out of respect for the caliph's morning meditation. He notices the small things, the way the light catches the intricate geometric carvings on the cedar doors, the smell of frankincense lingering in the air from the night before, the sound of his own steady heartbeat. He steps out onto a balcony as the sun finally breaks over the horizon. The sky turns from grey to a pale, shimmering gold. The heat of the day hasn't yet arrived. The air is still crisp and sweet. Al-Mu'tasim breathes it in deeply. He knows that today will bring petitions, maps to be studied, and the complex machinery of an empire to be oiled and turned. There is a deep wisdom in his patience. He does not rush toward the future. He stands in the present, grounded by the physical world, listening to the heartbeat of his people. He knows that to build something that lasts, one must first understand the foundation. And he is a man who knows the earth. As the city of Baghdad begins to stir, the sound of a distant cart, the first cries of the marketplace, Al-Mu'tasim turns back toward the interior of the palace. He is ready. The calligraphy of the dawn has been written, and now the work of the day begins. Close your eyes now and imagine that cool morning air. Feel the stillness of the palace, the strength of the stone, and the steady, calm presence of a man who knows his purpose. The world is vast, and the desert is wide, but for this moment, everything is in its proper place. The river flows, the sun rises, and the story of Samara is waiting to be told. Sleep now, and let the rhythm of the Tigris carry you into the quiet of the night. We will speak of the stones and the horses another time. For now, there is only the peace of the dawn. Chapter 2, The Sultan's Garden and the Weight of a Quiet Throne. Let me tell you about a morning in the year 833, when the Caliph Al-Mu'tasim walked through his private garden in Samara, the city he himself had built upon the banks of the Tigris. Picture him there, this eighth son of the great Harun al-Rashid, a man now in his early 40s, his beard touched with the first silver threads of middle age. He had not expected to rule. 7 brothers had stood between him and the throne, yet here he was, the commander of the faithful, walking alone among the pomegranate trees as the morning light turned the river to molten copper in the distance. The garden was still cool. Dew clung to the leaves of the orange trees his gardeners had planted 3 years before, when the new capital was nothing but architects' drawings and ambitious dreams. He could hear the fountain in the courtyard beyond the wall, its water splashing in that particular rhythm that speaks of peace, of order maintained, of systems working as they should. Al-Mu'tasim paused beside a rose bush. His mother had been a slave woman named Marida from the distant lands of the Sogdians, and she had taught him, when he was very young, to notice the small beauties that others overlooked. A particular shade of pink in a petal. The way morning light caught the edge of a leaf. These moments, she had told him, were gifts that cost nothing and belonged to everyone equally. He had been thinking, that morning, about his Turkish soldiers. History would remember this decision, though he could not know it then. He had done something unprecedented. He had built an army not from the Arab tribes who had always provided the caliphate's strength, but from Turkish warriors brought from the steppes far to the east. Young men taken as slaves, trained as soldiers, and elevated to positions of extraordinary trust. The old families in Baghdad had been outraged. This was one reason, not the only one, but an important one, why he had moved the capital here, to Samarra, to this new city rising from the desert earth. He needed space. He needed distance. He needed room for something new, to take root without the constant whispers of those who preferred the old ways. But standing there in his garden, Al-Mu'tasim wondered, as rulers often do in quiet moments, whether he had been wise. The Turkish guards were loyal, yes. They were skilled, disciplined, fierce in battle. But they were also separate, apart from the people they protected. They spoke a different language. They kept their own customs. In the markets of Samarra, he had heard, there was tension. He walked on, his soft leather boots making almost no sound on the stone path. A servant appeared at the garden gate, bowed and waited. The caliph acknowledged him with a slight gesture, and the man approached, carrying a tray with dates, fresh bread, and a cup of water flavored with rose essence. This was Al-Mu'tasim's custom, to break his fast simply, often alone, before the day's audiences began. He took the cup and sipped slowly, tasting the coolness, the subtle sweetness. The servant withdrew without a word, as trained. The caliph sat on a marble bench beneath a fig tree and ate a date, then another. He thought about his brother, Al-Mamun, who had ruled before him. Al-Mamun had loved learning, had filled his court with scholars and translators, had built the great house of wisdom in Baghdad, where Greek philosophy was rendered into Arabic. Al-Mu'tasim had continued this patronage. He was no enemy of knowledge, but his own interests had always been more practical. Military strategy, engineering, the logistics of moving armies and building cities. Perhaps, he thought, each ruler brings what his time requires. His brother had given the empire wisdom. He would give it strength and stability. A bird landed on the fountain's edge, dipped its beak, and drank. Al-Mu'tasim watched it, this small, ordinary moment. The bird knew nothing of empires or armies, or the weight of decisions that rippled across thousands of miles. It simply drank and flew away. The sun was higher now. Soon his viziers would arrive with their reports and requests. There would be disputes to settle, appointments to make, letters to read from distant governors. There would be news from the Byzantine frontier, where tension always simmered. There would be the endless, intricate work of keeping an empire functioning, day after ordinary day. But for now, for just a few moments more, Al-Mu'tasim sat in his garden and finished his simple breakfast, a powerful man in a quiet place, holding the morning like a secret before the world rushed in. Let me tell you about the evenings Al-Mu'tasim ibn Harun al-Rashid spent in quiet counsel with his philosopher's lantern, a time when the bustle of the day gave way to the soft hum of night in the grand city of Baghdad. Imagine the scene. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, and the minarets of the city begin to glow with the light of countless lamps. In his private chamber, Al-Mu'tasim sat at a low table, the flickering light of an oil lamp casting long shadows on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug beneath his feet. The air was thick with the scent of rosewater and the faint, comforting aroma of aged parchment. Al-Mu'tasim's day had been filled with the weighty matters of governance. He had met with his viziers, listened to petitions, and made decisions that would shape the lives of his people. But now, as the night settled around him, he sought solace in the quiet company of his books and his thoughts. He reached for a well-worn volume, its leather cover soft and supple from years of use. The pages, yellowed with age, crackled gently as he turned them, each one a testament to the wisdom of the past. The philosopher's lantern, a simple brass oil lamp, sat beside him, its light dancing gently as if sharing in the rhythm of his breathing. It was a modest thing, unadorned, yet it held a special place in his heart. It had been a gift from a wise old scholar, a man who had spent his life in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. The lamp had become a symbol of his own journey, a journey that was as much about self-discovery as it was about the acquisition of knowledge. Al-Mu'tasim's eyes scanned the pages before him, absorbing the words as if they were nourishment for his soul. He read slowly, savoring each phrase, each idea. The words of the ancient philosophers, the insights of the poets, the lessons of history, all of these were grist for his mill, shaping his understanding of the world and his place in it. As he read, he would often pause, his fingers tracing the edges of the pages, his mind wandering down the paths of thought that the words had opened up. He would reflect on the decisions he had made during the day, weighing them against the wisdom of the ages. Sometimes he would find confirmation, a sense of validation that he was on the right path. Other times, he would feel a pang of doubt, a whisper of uncertainty that would gnaw at him until he found a way to resolve it. One such evening, as the night deepened and the sounds of the city grew quieter, Al-Mu'tasim found himself contemplating the nature of power. He had been reading the works of an ancient Greek philosopher, a man who had written about the responsibilities of rulers and the moral dilemmas they often faced. The words resonated with him, echoing his own struggles and uncertainties. He thought back to his morning routine, the way he would rise with the sun, perform his ablutions, and offer his prayers. The ritual was a grounding force in his life, a reminder of the values that guided him. He would then break his fast with a simple meal of dates and water, a humble beginning to a day that would often be filled with the trappings of power and privilege. As he ate, he would often find himself in the company of his advisers, men who were as dedicated to the well-being of the realm as he was. They would discuss the issues of the day, their voices low and serious, their expressions thoughtful. Al-Mu'tasim would listen carefully, absorbing their insights, weighing their advice. He knew that the decisions he made would have far-reaching consequences, and he took his responsibilities seriously. But as the night wore on, and the city outside his chamber grew quiet, Al-Mu'tasim found himself longing for something more. He longed for the quiet moments of reflection, the time to process his thoughts and feelings. He longed for the company of his books, the wisdom of the ages, the insights that could only be gained through quiet contemplation. And so he would return to his philosopher's lantern, to the soft light that seemed to invite him into a world of thought and reflection. He would read, he would ponder, he would grapple with the big questions of life. And in the quiet of the night, beneath the flickering light of his lantern, he would find the wisdom and the courage to face the challenges of the day ahead. As the night deepened and the stars began to twinkle in the sky outside his window, Al-Mu'tasim would often find himself drifting into a state of quiet contemplation. The worries of the day would fade away, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. He would feel a deep connection to the world around him, a sense of unity with the universe that transcended the boundaries of time and space. And as he sat there, in the quiet of the night, beneath the soft glow of his philosopher's lantern, Al-Mu'tasim ibn Harun al-Rashid would find the strength and the wisdom to face the challenges of the day ahead. He would find the courage to make the tough decisions, to stand up for what he believed in, to lead his people with compassion and understanding. And he would find the humility to recognize that, despite his power and his privilege, he was but a small part of a much larger whole. And so the evenings would pass, one by one, each one a testament to the power of quiet reflection, the wisdom of the ages, and the courage to face the challenges of life with humility and grace. And Al-Mu'tasim ibn Harun al-Rashid would continue his journey, guided by the light of his philosopher's lantern and the wisdom of the ages. Let me tell you about a quiet turning in his life, a chapter shaped by water and earth, by the slow arithmetic of stones and soldiers. Al-Mu'tasim ibn Harun al-Rashid had taken the reins in a time that still bore the echoes of turmoil, and in the fourth year after he became caliph, he set about a very practical work. He drew new lines upon the map, and those lines would change how he lived and how he ruled. In 836, he founded a new seat of government along the banks of the Tigris, the place we now know as Samarra. The act itself was plain in its purpose, and plain in the way history records it, to find a setting where the troops he trusted could be housed and disciplined without the crowded, factional pressures of Baghdad. He moved the court there, and with it came palaces and barracks built side by side, the accommodations of rule paired with the quarters of military service. It was a city planned with intent, not accidental, precincts for residence, for the guard, for administration, each set apart, each claiming its measured space. Imagine the morning in that new city. The Tigris slipped by, indifferent, carrying silt and a faint tang of riverweed, and at the water's edge there were the first tasks of any day: inspection, conversation, the soft rustle of attendants arranging robes and papers. The great decisions of state do not always arrive with trumpets. More often they arrive in a room where a bowl of simple food cools, while men speak in low voices about supply lines, about pay for troops, about the map-marked roads that would carry men and horses toward distant frontiers. Chroniclers note that the Turkish slave soldiers, the corps that Al-Mu'tasim had relied upon and that would come to define his reign, were quartered there, trained and kept near, and the presence of those battalions altered the rhythm of everyday life in the city. He had, by necessity, to measure out his days differently. The court in Samarra was not the old, familiar salon of Baghdad, but a working capital where geometry answered to governance, where a street could ease the passage of cavalry, where a gateway could be watched, where offices and chambers opened onto courtyards designed for inspection and for the quiet calculation of state revenue. The planning itself was a kind of philosophy for him. He was defining, in stone and in order, how authority would be enacted, not by rhetoric alone, but by spatial arrangement and by the steady administration of men and money. There were small, intimate habits amid the newness. When he received petitioners, it was with the same deliberate patience recorded of rulers who understood the weight of a decision. The paperwork of a caliphate is a peculiar thing. Reports on harvests and annals of tax, the names of commanders and their reports from the front, petitions from citizens and appeals from provincial officials. One may imagine the texture of the pages, the scratch of quill on parchment, the faint smell of ink, and the dust stirred up from courtyards where horses stamped. These are the honest details of rule. They do not shout, they accumulate, and it was in their accumulation that Al-Mu'tasim fashioned his authority. He trusted the Turks for their military skill, and he trusted structure for its certainty. The garrisons were kept together in cantonments that were distinct in plan, and the city's layout reflected a clear intent to keep military functions contained and supervised. That was political geometry made tangible, to create distance between the volatile mingling of forces in Baghdad and the controlled deployment of troops in a purpose-built city. Historians who wrote after him record that this was not merely a preference, but a policy, a way to steward the means of force without allowing those means to scatter the center of governance. The soundscape of Samara would have been a steady, muted chorus, the measured thud of hooves on packed earth, the low voice of clerks speaking names and figures, the hammer of masons finishing a wall, the nearer whisper of commanders conferring. Night softened these noises, but did not erase them. Lamplight glowed in the palaces, and watchmen kept their posts. In quieter hours, those who served him would say that he would move from room to room with a measured step, meeting with generals and secretaries alike, attentive to the detail of a line item as he was to the deployment of a regiment. What is striking, when one reads the records, is that Al-Mu'tasim did not rely solely on spectacle. His strength, as the chroniclers record, was in organization. The choice to build Samara, to organize garrisons and quarters and the very pathways of the city, was itself an exercise in governance as deliberate as any decree. This was the geometry of rule, arranging people and places so that order could be maintained, and so that the instruments of power would be disciplined by design. There were human tensions within this design. The move to Samara was also a distancing, and distancing has its solitude. A ruler apart from the old capital is a ruler more exposed to the counsel he chooses, and more dependent on the circles he keeps close. Historians note that the Turkish core became central in his power structure, and that fact would shape both his decisions and the later memory of his reign. In those afternoons by the river, when the sun lay low and the city's long shadows marked out its straight avenues, that reality must have been present like a companion, necessary, watchful, not to be ignored. He was not a man given to loud displays in daily life, at least not according to the tone of the sources that remain. Rather, his life in Samara reads as a slow arranging of pieces: men, money, walls, and roads. He calibrated the morning's reports, oversaw the lodging of troops, received envoys and notices, and permitted the machinery of state to move with a kind of measured regularity. From that steadiness came the capacity to act decisively when action was called for, whether on distant fronts or in matters of domestic order. So the river kept its course, and Samara rose along its bank, a city born of necessity and shaped by the practical wisdom that comes from facing the business of power. In those quiet days, the geometry he drew on the plain became the scaffolding of his rule, a lesson in how boundaries and order can steady a fragile polity. And when the sun finally sank and the river darkened, the courtyards cooled and the city listened, for the next day would require the same careful accounting, the same patient attention to the small things that, added together, hold a realm together. Chapter 5: The Keeper of Keys and the Palace at Rest. Let me tell you about the quietest hour in the House of Wisdom. It was not midnight, when even the owls were asleep. It was the hour just before dawn, when the great city of Baghdad lay wrapped in a deep blue silence, and the Caliph Al-Mu'tasim would walk. He was the keeper of keys, you see. Not just the iron keys that hung from the belt of the chamberlain, which opened storerooms and strongboxes. He was the keeper of another set of keys, the keys to the day itself. And he would use the first of them in this silent hour. Imagine the scene. The palace corridors, vast and cool, were lit only by the soft, guttering light of a single oil lamp he carried himself. The marble floors, polished to a shine by daylight, were now dark pools reflecting the faint glow. His footsteps, in soft leather slippers, made no sound. The only noise was the distant, rhythmic breathing of the guards at their posts, and the occasional rustle of a parchment scroll settling on a desk in an empty scriptorium. He moved through his own home not as its master, but as its guest, respectful of its sleep. He would often pause by a latticed window, setting the lamp down on a stone ledge. There he would watch the Tigris. In that pre-dawn darkness, the great river was a ribbon of black silk, its surface occasionally puckered by a feeding fish or stroked by a breath of wind from the desert. He would listen to the water, a sound so constant the city forgot to hear it. It was here, in this stillness, that the weight of the crown felt lightest. The petitions, the dispatches from distant provinces, the reports from his builders in Samara, all of it receded. There was only the river, and the coming light, and the immense quiet of a world not yet awake. His first meal of the day was a simple key to unlock the body. It was taken alone, in a small chamber adjacent to his private quarters. A servant would bring a tray, flatbread still warm from the clay oven, a bowl of dates, a piece of white cheese, and a cup of water. He ate slowly, with deliberate care, tasting each thing. He once remarked to a companion that a man who rushes his bread will rush his judgments. The simplicity was a choice. In a palace that could summon feasts from across the empire, this quiet breakfast was a reminder of the desert origins of his people, the unadorned sustenance that required gratitude, not ceremony. After the meal, he would proceed to his study. This was not the grand audience hall, but a smaller, book-lined room. Here the second key was turned. The first scrolls and reports of the day would be waiting. But before he touched them, he had a ritual. He would take a clean sheet of paper, a reed pen, and a pot of ink. For a few moments, he would write not as a caliph, but as a man thinking. Sometimes it was a list of questions for his chief engineer about the foundation of a new canal. Other times, it was a note to himself about a conversation he'd had the previous day, a reminder to consider the other man's perspective more deeply. This private writing was a space for doubt, for untested ideas, for the unformed thoughts that could not yet be spoken in council. He kept these pages, and they were never seen by his secretaries. The heart of his morning was the walk to the stables. This was his truest joy. The smell of hay, leather, and honest sweat was a world away from the incense of the palace. His favorite horses knew his step. He would run a hand along a powerful neck, feel the muscle beneath the sleek coat, offer a piece of apple from his palm. He spoke to his grooms not as subordinates, but as fellow experts, asking after a mare's health or a colt's training. In the connection between a man and a horse, he found a clarity and loyalty that politics rarely offered. It was a quiet anchor. By mid-morning, the palace was fully awake. The silence had been replaced by the low hum of administration, the scratch of pens in the chancery, the murmur of scholars in the library, the firm tread of the palace guard changing shifts. Al-Mu'tasim would now move to his audience chamber, the final key turning to begin the public day. But he carried the stillness with him. His questions to his advisers were known for their slow, considered pace. He would listen completely, his eyes often looking down at his hands, as if weighing the words themselves. He understood that a palace, like a man, needed rest to function. The relentless noise of ambition and administration had to be balanced by deliberate quiet. His wisdom was not only in the commands he gave, but in the spaces he allowed between them, the silent walks, the private reflections, the moments of simple, sensory awareness. He was building an empire of brick and mortar in Samarra, but here, in Baghdad, he was sustaining an empire of the mind, one that required peace as much as it required power. And so he guarded the palace's rest as fiercely as he guarded its gates, knowing that in that deep, blue silence before dawn, the truest strength was gathered. Gather close now, and let the embers of the hearth glow low. The day is behind us, and the world outside is hushed, save for the rhythmic sighing of the wind. We have travelled far through the life of Al-Mu'tasim, the eighth of his line, the son of the legendary Harun al-Rashid. We have seen him as a young prince in the shadow of the great city, and as a leader forging a new path. But tonight, for our final gathering, I want to tell you about his quietest hour. Imagine the year is 842 of the Common Era. We find ourselves not in the crowded, labyrinthine streets of Baghdad, but in the sprawling, sun-bleached expanse of Samarra. This was the city Al-Mu'tasim built from the very dust of the earth, a city whose name, *Saraman-Ra, meant, "He who sees it is rejoiced." The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert air cool and crisp. In the palace of Jorsak al-Karkani, the caliph sits alone on a wide balcony of carved limestone. The palace is a marvel of geometry, its walls adorned with intricate stucco patterns, vine leaves and swirling scrolls that seem to move if you watch them long enough by candlelight. Can you hear it? The soft, distant murmur of the Tigris River. It flows just beyond the palace walls, a silver ribbon under the heavy moon. Al-Mu'tasim listens to that water. It is the same water that flowed past his father's palace years ago. Yet here, in Samarra, it sounds different. It sounds like a beginning. In these final months of his life, the caliph's movements have become slow and deliberate. He is no longer the restless commander who spent years in the saddle. He spends his mornings now in the palace gardens, walking among the cooling fountains. He watches the gardeners tend to the jasmine and the bitter orange trees, marveling at how life can be coaxed from the dry soil with enough patience and a steady hand. He often stops to run his fingers over the rough bark of a young tree, perhaps reflecting on the fact that he will not see it reach its full height. There is no sadness in this thought, only a quiet, grounded wisdom. At midday, he might sit with his scribes. He was never a man of many words. History tells us he was a man of action, a man of strength. But in the stillness of his study, he values the scratch of the reed pen on parchment. He reviews the ledgers of the empire, the maps of the canals he ordered dug to bring life to the arid plains. He looks at the blueprints of the great mosque of Samarra, with its spiraling minaret that climbs toward the stars. He understands now that a leader's truest legacy is not found in the clamor of a parade, but in the shade offered by a wall he built or the water flowing through a channel he cleared. As evening falls, Al-Mu'tasim takes his meal simply. Perhaps a bowl of cooling yogurt with cucumbers, some flatbread scented with nigella seeds, and a handful of dates from the groves of Basra. He eats slowly, savoring the textures. He watches the shadows lengthen across the marble floors. He thinks of his soldiers, the young men he brought from the eastern lands to form his guard. He moved his entire court to this new city, just to ensure they had a place where they could live without friction with the people of Baghdad. It was a difficult decision, a heavy one, but as he looks out over the quiet rooftops of Samarra, he feels the rightness of it. He sought peace for his people, even if it meant building a new world from nothing. Now the moon is high. The caliph rises from his seat, his silk robes rustling softly against the stone. He walks to the edge of the balcony and looks toward the north. The air smells of damp earth and the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming flowers. He reflects on the nature of power. He has held the weight of an empire in his hands for nearly 9 years. He has seen the rise of new cities and the fading of old grievances. He realizes that he is but a single traveler in a long caravan of history. His father, Harun, was a giant before him. His sons will carry the torch after he is gone. In the grand silence of the night, Al-Mu'tasim finds comfort in being a link in that chain. He thinks of the thousands of people sleeping in the city below, the merchants, the weavers, the children tucked into their beds. Their safety is his quietest pride. He has provided the walls. He has provided the water. A weariness, gentle and predictable, begins to settle over him. It is the fatigue of a man who has finished his day's work and finds it good. He retreats from the balcony, his footsteps echoing softly in the vast, cool hall. The flickering lamps are being dimmed by the attendants, leaving only the soft, blue glow of the moonlight spilling through the high arches. He reaches his sleeping chamber. The bed is draped in fine linens, smelling faintly of sandalwood. Before he lies down, he stands for a moment in the center of the room, breathing deeply. The tensions of the empire, the logistics of the borders, the complexities of the court, all of it falls away. In this room, he is not the caliph. He is simply a man seeking rest. He remembers the words of the scholars he invited to his court, men who spoke of the stars and the movement of the heavens. He feels a sense of kinship with the order of the universe. Everything has its season. Everything has its time to wake and its time to sleep. Al-Mu'tasim reclines onto the pillows. The silk is cool against his skin. Outside, the tigress continues its ancient journey, whispering to the reeds along the bank. The city of Samara stands silent, a monument to a dream of order and beauty. His eyes close. The image of the silver river is the last thing in his mind. He is at peace with the desert, at peace with the river, and at peace with the legacy he leaves behind. Sleep now as the caliph sleeps. Let the quiet of the palace and the rhythm of the flowing water carry you into the stillness. The story is told, the journey is complete, and the night is kind. Good night, my dear ones.